Hello, welcome to Bear Conversations, a vulnerable space for real people and their real faith. I'm your host, Daniela, and I'm really excited to have you today. I feel like I'm extra excited because this is the first episode of 2026, and we're talking about a really important topic for me, something that I've been thinking through and working through, and I felt really led to share. So I'm very excited, and I hope you are too. And if you're listening to this, just know that you're already part of my testimony because the fact that I recorded and I posted on time tells me that I have broken a cycle, and I'm really praying that that is the case. I'm speaking it into existence, and yes, God, we've done it. We've done it. We've broken a cycle. So I have personally defined cycles based on my experience alone. Um, I see cycles as a series of events and patterns that consistently show up unconsciously that have affected my life into some capacity. So some people might be like some positive cycles or cycles that can bring positive impacts, but a lot of it I would say, and what I'm focusing on is the ones that have negative impact on us, that have consistently held us back in ways that we do not desire. I feel like a lot of us have unidentified cycles in our life that when they show up, it leaves us in a space of frustration. And I just want to propose it to you now that I feel like the first step to seeing difference is really identifying it. You cannot change and you cannot deal with or you cannot handle things well if you cannot name what they are. Because really that is what we're really going to focus on in this episode, about taking about the importance of being able to identify and then taking the time to do that self reflection so that we can begin to identify what is showing up in our lives before we even consider going to the roots and before we even consider learning to change it. So for me, I remember when I first realized that I was a people pleaser as well as I had this fear of man. Like I genuinely had this fear of what people would say, this fear of what people would think, of offending people, of hurting people. And so if you're listening to this and you know me, you might already know I'm very confrontational. I'm not really scared of confrontation, but then I don't necessarily seek it out unless I've been wrong. So I have a strong sense of justice, um, and therefore it allows me to be confrontational. But on a normal day, I don't like to inconvenience people. I remember me and my sister were on a flight. I can't remember right now where we were headed, but the air hostess started handing out these landing forms, like landing cards. And if you don't know, it's a form you kind of fill in. It's a very small like card where you fill in and write basically where you're coming from, your passport information, stuff like that you hand to immigration on landing. And I didn't have a pen, so I knew I needed to fill in this card for when we arrived, but I didn't have a pen. And the lady beside me, from memory, she was Italian. She had already filled hers in, and I was absolutely petrified to ask for her pen, to ask to borrow her pen. And I was feeling immense guilt that I couldn't speak her language. I felt like I would be a nuisance. I was also scared of the reaction she may have to me, um, because I asked for her pen, and that kept me frozen for at least 20 minutes. And I remember like telling my sister, because she was not too far from me. I think I was on the aisle seats. And then the Italian couple and lady were the middle and the window seats, and my sister was on the other aisle, the aisle seats on my right. And I was telling her that I really need to ask, but I'm so scared. And she was willing to do it for me, but she told me that I need to push myself. Mind you, my sister is 3 years younger, so um for context, it wasn't, she was offering to help, but she wanted me to basically kind of overcome that fear. And I remember thinking to myself and trying to rationalize it, like, what is making me so scared to ask this woman for a pen? um in the end, I forced myself to do it. I did. It took me over 20 minutes, and I mimed like, could I please, like this? And I said thank you. And I kept like bowing my head, because even though I'd overcome that instance of being scared and I've asked her for this pen, I still internalized that what I had done was a nuisance, and what I had done had inconvenienced her. When in reality, that woman probably did not care at all. She did not have me in her head at all, but I had her and I had myself in my head so deeply that I was frozen in fear. So, and after that situation, this was about 2 years ago, I started to notice more and more of moments where I would be stuck in fear to just basically speak up or ask someone for something. And it's just, I hated it because I've always maintained that I'm quite brave and I'm quite confrontational. So why am I scared to ask for help? Like ultimately, that's what it felt like. That why am I scared to ask for help or scared to say anything that may inconvenience someone or point out something they may have done wrong? This fear of man was deeply ingrained in me that I couldn't move forward. Another example of how this kind of shows up, or another place where I noticed this was about almost almost 10 years ago when I was in A levels and I went to a boarding school. So I went to secondary school. For context, I went to secondary school in Nigeria and then I moved to the UK for A levels and university. And I've been in the UK since, like half and half in Nigeria, half in the UK. So when I moved here, it was a massive culture shock. The fact that I wasn't from there, the food I did not like. I struggled with the understanding their accent sometimes. It just being away from my family. I was 16, not really having any close family in the country. It really was a lot. With that shock, what added onto that was fear of man again. I remember being like, I think then I called it shyness, but as I've grown up a bit more, I'm realizing that it all stemmed from the same place where I'd be too scared to go to lunch on my own. I needed someone to be with me. I was too scared to walk down like hallways on my own. I'd feel like I needed to have a friend and I'd actively not go to eat because I was too scared to come to the lunch hall on my own. I have nowhere to sit. And as a 16, 17-year old, it's a rational fear in for that time and in the context, but it was it was something where I was willing to completely inconvenience and even hurt myself because I was scared of what the fact that people were going to look at me. And I carried that for a long time over the years. Um, and it just wasn't, it's not something that I liked. I hated the fact that I was willing to suffer because I was unwilling to mildly inconvenience someone because to some degree I felt either undeserving of help and I did not want to be a burden. As I got closer to my mid 20s, I really had to I needed to deal with it because I said I can't continue on like this. It does not make any sense. I cannot always hurt myself because I don't want to inconvenience someone else. So when I really took the time to identify what that was, I realized that I did have some degree of people pleasing and a fear of man. So then I had to really analyze after I've identified what this issue is that what are the specific things that I'm scared and I'm imagining will happen um that probably won't happen, but what were the specific things that I have in my head that were going to happen that I did not want to happen. And one of them was I didn't want to be made fun of. I did not want public humiliation. I didn't want to be insulted. I didn't want to be made angry at all. And the way I dealt with that was okay, I was like, why would they insult me? And if they did, was that a reflection of myself or a reflection of them as a person? That rationalizing in that way helps me start to walk down the path of standing up for myself, basically, for speaking and going into uncomfortable situations without the 20 minutes of like freezing. I would still be scared and I still have the anxiety, but then I wouldn't have that 20 minutes where I just stood there thinking and worrying and basically like soaking in anxiety out of it. I didn't have that anymore. And it didn't happen overnight. It didn't happen after the first time I thought about it. It happened it happened after practicing it. In every situation where I would come up where I had to basically ask for help or look or like inconvenience someone a little bit, I had to give myself a pep talk. And rather than give allow myself to accept the talk that came from fear. So I rejected the fear talk and forced myself to give myself a pep talk. I would say, okay, the reality is you're not asking for anything big. You are, if they want to say no, they'll say no. You will not die. And if they say anything about you, it's not going to change your life directly. It might hurt your feelings, but then it's not going to make you any shorter, any taller, any um it's just not going to change anything that has permanence. Like, my family is not going to die, I'm not going to die, my life is not going to end. Life will keep going. So it was bearable. It was something that I knew I could bear and I could get over. And having when I started to do that, then each instance I was able to actually go to each instance head on. I was able to tackle each instance head on. I don't know if at all you've ever felt or you can resonate with any of this. Like, it's I feel like it is something that is very common. And we don't really realize, and we don't really name it. We just think it's because we're either shy or we have anxiety, which definitely plays a part to some degree. But then there is something more deep in your heart that is probably at play that you've never considered. And I don't know, I feel like it'd be a good opportunity for you to kind of think back, what what exactly am I scared of? What results am I creating in my imagination that I think is going to happen that I do not want to happen? And what are the chances of that situation actually happening? And if that situation does happen, what are the final effects of it? Will it create a massive change in the direction of my life? Will it create something so traumatic that I cannot get over? Sometimes the answer is yes. I will not pretend like that's not true. But a lot of times the answer is no. It's something that you can survive and you will be able to get over. So I feel like it'd be, I don't know, what are your thoughts on this? I would really love to hear from any of you listening. Do you feel like replacing fear talk with a pep talk can be effective? And I'm not talking, I think it's good to point out that I'm not talking about anything clinical here. So I'm not talking like if you've been told that you have actual clinical anxiety or depression or anything. I'm not speaking from that perspective. I'm speaking on the, I would say, I don't want to call it superficial, but I would say more surface level challenges that we can overcome day to day, that we experience consistently, that show up as a cycle that holds us back, but we're able to operate normally because we're not ill in some specific way. Does that make sense? I've been depressed and I've had like severe anxiety, so I know that that's a completely different ballgame. That's like a an illness that I do not wish on anyone at all, and it's an illness that should be taken very, very seriously. But in the moments where I didn't have that illness, I know what anxiety still looked like, what anxiety could look like in my day to day, and I know the effects it had. So that's kind of what we're focusing on. So um if you are in a place where you feel like clinically you might be depressed or have anxiety, I would really implore you to focus and prioritize getting better, learning to, not even learning, seeking help, the right professional help, because you deserve a life where you can manage these things better. When it also came to me breaking cycles, breaking the cycle of people pleasing and the fear of man, I really had to also identify the type of person I was, because these cycles do not look the same in everyone, and the way we overcome them does not actually look the same in every person. We are motivated completely by different things. We desire different things for ourselves. Like, for example, you can either be a results kind of motivated person, or you're someone who loves the habit, and seeing a streak is what motivates you. So I know for myself, I'm more a results person. When I see the results of my efforts, that's when I actually believe that my efforts were actually worth it, rather than being able to see a streak I've created in maintaining a habit. That's why this I think this is really important. Whereas there's some other people who, the fact that they can say for the last 30 days I've been doing this really well. One of my best friends is like that. She's really good at keeping to her word and maintaining streaks. Knowing what motivates you as a person, whether it's results or streaks, will really help you in learning to break that cycle, because then you choose means and efforts that work with your motivation. Because sometimes it's counterproductive when we do A, but we're someone who's motivated by B, if that makes sense. Improvement is a daily decision that we make, and it that how that daily decision shows up looks completely different from everyone else. So sometimes, like now, I would say as a results motivated person, and also someone who my specific cycle was people pleasing and the fear of man. My I need to start my day by grounding my mind and understanding that I have value, and I am not an inconvenience in this world, and I should be able to receive what I'm willing to give out, if that makes sense. So, because I know that I wouldn't find someone an inconvenience if they ask me for help, and I know that I will not, I don't like, I will not make fun of someone or tear them down because of something so simple. I ground my mind that the average person is also not going to treat me that way. Yes, there are outliers, we know this, but then I need to start my day by grounding my mind and understanding my intrinsic value, as well as reminding myself that the average person is not even thinking about me like that. The average person doesn't care, doesn't care about me enough to deliberately choose to ruin my day or ruin my life. That is how and then that is how I started to handle it daily. And what really motivates me is when I notice that I've made daily decisions where I have moved with knowledge of my intrinsic value, as well as without worrying about inconveniencing people. And that is what I feel motivated by. I think it would be irresponsible of me to basically tell you and prescribe that you um try to identify the cycle without helping or at least sharing some of the tools to do that. As I mentioned or have mentioned before, is that I'm a Christian, so a lot of my methods is very biblical based, as well as has heavy dependence on God as the anchor for most of the stuff I do, as well as the lights to show me where things are. So I can only ever speak from that perspective. But I do appreciate not everyone is of the same faith and may not look have the same type of relationship with God that I have. It may look completely different, and that's not for me to kind of assume that we're all the same. I think it'd be really good to point out that when you start to actually put in the work to notice and identify these patterns in your life, we shouldn't enter the realm of self criticism. The whole point of self awareness is to build yourself up. And the fact that you've already noticed these patterns and you want to get better shows you care. It already shows that you care about yourself. So let us not turn that care and that love we have for ourselves to something that is distasteful and ends up hurting us. We're not here to critique ourselves. We're here to identify and notice things and then put in the work to become better or to change or move in the direction that will make our lives better, as well as will grow us in the way that we desire. Okay. So I really want you to show yourself grace and be soft about it, because you don't want to enter the realm of self criticism. And I say that from experience because I tend to be really hard on myself, and talk down to myself, but I do not, the same way you would handle talking to a friend about the specific situation or about whatever is troubling them, is the way I need you to speak to yourself, because you are your first friend. Okay. But if I was, the tools I would share for starting to identify is to really look at scenarios with a humble mind. I would recommend journaling. You don't necessarily need to write down the whole scenario, but then write down a specific scenario where you showed up for yourself in a way that you didn't desire, or you didn't really want, or you didn't like, and you want to change. And then write out specifically what about that situation you not like, without self-criticizing yourself, but saying, I didn't like that I was frozen. I didn't like that I stuttered. Something along those lines. And then from each point, then say, what was the root of that? Was it fear? Was it anger? Was it anxiety? Was it pride? Because sometimes these cycles show up because we are prideful and we don't realize that we are holding ourselves back because of an inflated ego that is actually covering us or keeping us safe from accepting the truth, which might not be the best, but then we can't mask these things. We need to allow ourselves to see ourselves clearly, and then we can finally build to become who we desire. So if you take the time to then deep dive into what was the root cause or what were the root emotions we're feeling, then you can start the work towards actually improving on those things. So if it's a fear issue, you can look for the right resources on fear. If it's anxiety, you can look for the right resources on anxiety, and you can actually begin real work. If you're going to take anything away from this episode, I would really love if it was about noticing isn't a bad thing. It's an invitation for change. Cycles, all these things that show up in our lives are just information, and it doesn't define us, and it cannot have the final say. It's just an invitation for us to move and improve. Breaking cycles doesn't happen all at once. Be gentle with yourself as you notice what's been repeating. So if all this season does is help you notice a little bit more and become a little bit more gentler with yourself, then it has done its job. Thank you so much for joining this conversation with me. I really do look forward to your feedback and replies. Thank you so much for listening. I'll see you in the next episode. Bye.